Well, hello there and welcome to the Second Life Book Club. My name is Draxtor Dupre. And today we are going to talk about virtue hoarding with Professor Catherine Liu from the University of California at Irvine. Virtue hoarding is something different than virtue signaling. If you don't know what either of these terms mean, don't fear, because I don't know either. Actually, I do, because I read her amazing book. Very short read, very powerful, very thought-provoking book, Virtue Hoarders, The Case Against the Professional Managerial Class. Now, we are here. Let me walk down to Catherine, and maybe the camera can give us a little bit of a wide view because we're here in front of the Church of Virtue Hoarders. And here is Catherine Liu, Professor Catherine Liu, teaching film at UCI, right?
Right,
Hello?
that's right. I'm in the Film and Media Studies department. Yep.
You're in the Film and Media Studies department, Catherine, and you're telling us that the professional managerial class, is there somehow something wrong with it?
You know what? I don't want to get into a moralization of it because people are like, "Oh, I'm a PMC, you're a PMC, how dare you do this? Oh, you're a bad person, blah blah blah." But it's a historical materialist category, and like the bourgeoisie or even the proletariat, these are descriptive categories that Marx used that were based on people's class relations to economics, means of production, and increasingly in a post-industrial world, forms of ideological reproduction. So I say that this class has generally higher degrees. It's values education. It emerged out of a progressive impetus, especially in the industrialized world, of people who wanted to be anti-capitalist, who are not necessarily Marxist at the end of the 19th century, but saw, a lot of the damage the capitalism and exploitation had done, and they became reformists. They became people who were professionals who wanted to protect a certain kind of value and expertise from the ravages of the marketplace. So in the United States, the emergence of the professional managerial classes actually might be positive in the 1890s, 1910s, when you had the American Medical Association emerge, the American Association of University Professors, who wanted to protect people from, just big daddy money buying people off, buying off research. But what has happened in the 120, 30 years since the class emerged as a class of experts who nevertheless had to earn money through a salary, they couldn't live on a fortune, they have become increasingly submissive with regard to the needs of big money of capitalism. So like the AMA, the American Medical Association, let me give you an example.
Let me briefly interrupt you. Thank you for laying this out. We're going to go into all this detail.
Okay.
But first, we're going to have to go through church. We have to briefly repent, and then and then afterwards we're in the office, and then we will go into all this detail. But I first want to also let people know that this book, which is really, really amazing, it's out from University of Minnesota Press. The camera can maybe go in here on the left side. We have all the English title, and on the right side, it just came out in German from Westend Verlag, and the translation, the title translation is absolutely brilliant. Die Tugendpächter. I don't know if we have any Germans in the audience, but it's just brilliant. And if you speak both languages, I think you will understand the play on words.
Yeah, it is also out in French with Édition Alia, and the French title is called Le Monopole de la Vertu, the Monopoly on Virtue.
See?
Yep.
Okay, good. I'm afraid to go into the Church of Virtue Hoarding as the son of a PMC, the son of two PMCs, I should say, but very well-meaning, nice PMCs. And what I thought here, and here we have our audience. Hello, audience. Thank you for coming to the program. I think we have more people also in the sitting in the office. But what when I encountered the title, before I read the book, I was trying to envision, Catherine, how my father, if he sees the book in the store and he goes like Virtue Hoarders, the case against the professional managerial class, he would get immediately defensive, and he would
Right.
possibly respond with something like that I wrote on this board up here. Um, I'm not hoarding anything. I'm leading by example by being a hardworking, morally strong individual. I'm a
Yeah.
role model for my kids and my community.
Right.
How would
Right.
you how would you respond to that?
Well, it's sad that he thinks that he's a role model, but that's part of his material privilege. I shouldn't say sad. It's the thing is that this class has taken its material privileges and turned them into moral ideals. And that's what every, ruling class, proxy ruling class does. But he would probably say like I've built institutions, and I know things that other people don't know, and I'm for tolerance, et cetera, et cetera. A lot of, the previous generation, our parents' generation, part of that post-war optimism about professionals. My father worked at the UN. The UN was going to bring about world peace. And they believe in liberalism and progress, but their world is really dominated by a force of accumulated wealth that they don't really want to confront, because it would mean saying things like, capitalism is not working. And these people the PMC basically wants to make capitalism work better. They don't
Hmm.
want to destroy capitalism. They want to be, it's in my darkest moments, like it's handmaidens, it's high priests. In my better moments, when I feel more, kindly about this, they want to execute and manage things for the general good above and beyond the marketplace. But a lot of this has to do with the fact that they have to believe in the public sphere. This is what the German Jürgen Habermas wrote about, where the people who were educated and debated ideas, and you had the war of ideas, and then people came out with the best ideas in the coffee shop because everyone could talk openly and debate things, and you were equal. And this was what he was saying was so important about the 18th century bourgeois public sphere, which led to revolution after revolution across the world because it promoted an idea of equality. And it was very
I'm not
different from.
Now I feel like I'm doing really a disservice to my dad, who comes from a working class background, and he was a public administrator, and he meant very well. He was and is a well-meaning person. I think we need to define how you define PMC, and I have a bunch of slides from quotes from the book. Let's go over here. Let's go to the
Well,
office.
yeah, let's not make it personal about your father or my father, but these are,
No,
of course,
what you're talking about, that milieu, and when I read the book, this is the milieu that I come from. And you're spot on with what you're saying, but I'm realizing as you're talking, we need to um, more define what we mean by the PMC. What maybe with a sort of a specific example, because your main thesis or point that I completely agree with is that we have here a class that is pretending to be holier than thou, that separates themselves from the working class by constantly criticizing people below them for their consumption patterns. I mean, a specific example that to me comes to mind when people go like, I only eat organic from Whole Foods, and I have a bicycle, and you drive your car to work? Oh my God. Saying that to a person, let's say an Uber driver
yeah,
who can't even
yeah,
make ends meet without having
right,
three jobs, right?
right,
Who
right,
has to eat at McDonald's on Monday, where they have the 20-cent burgers, let's say.
right, right.
That's the kind of person we're talking about, right?
Um, this is the cultural image. If you don't mind, I'll be more pedantic and talk about the origins of what this concept was, which
Hmm.
was actually something that left-wing sociologist Siegfried Kracauer came up with when he was studying 1920s Berlin. He called this new class of people die Angestellten. They were salaried employees who
Hmm.
were more prestigious than working class people who only worked by the hour or by the piece. And he said, sometimes these salaried employees, he would go and study them, and he was interviewing them, very sympathetic to them. They're part of Berlin society. We know them now very well. And they are what classic Marxists would say they're petit bourgeois, but they're not because they don't own anything. Petit
Hmm.
bourgeois like owns your house or something, or
Or like a
even owns a
small store,
business.
like,
A
right.
small, yeah, right, like Germany, all of the small business owners. But they work for large firms. They work in retail, and what Krakow discovered was in interviewing them, like the fact that they worked in offices, that they didn't work with their bodies, made them very, disdainful of blue collar working class people
Hmm.
who did, right? But he also found that their lives were very, very hard. I mean, Berlin is really poor and terrible. At the same time, they're consuming culture. They're part of this kind of urban environment, and the thing that really struck me was that he interviews this guy who works for a large firm, and he fires people because he wants to cut, because he's always cutting costs is what capitalists always do, right? Cut labor costs. And so Krakauer asks him, like, so what would you do if you had to fire yourself? And he said, well, of course I would fire myself because that's for the good of the firm. And this kind of identification with the owners of capital rather
Hmm.
than other workers is really a feature. But in
That's amazing, but
1976,
they must be so terrified too, because that class is terrified to fall below back to the
right,
dirty masses.
that's right.
But they're
This is what,
also, and you write actually in the book, you said that they're hypnotized by the rich and powerful, by the capitalists, and
yep.
by capital, they're hypnotized by them, and they're terrified of falling down. But they have absolutely, for the most part, they have little job security too, so they must be.
And it's getting worse and worse because for college educated people in America, they come out with student loan debt. They're very housing is so expensive. I'm not sure about what the situation in Germany, but yeah, this there are different strata now within the PMC. And the lower tier people who come out with college degrees who think they're going to enter the professions are finding that there's no place for them, and they've been taking on all this debt. It's different in Germany because because education is still free, higher education is still free. But I feel like
Changing with
with
the
the
cost of living, because it's not as crazy as in the US, but with the
right,
cost of living rising, you cannot,
it's
I would say you
insane
can't go to college without
taking out
additional
debt.
help
Yeah,
from your
and
parents
help from
or
parent.
having,
Yeah,
yeah.
it's
Uh,
insane.
le-
It's so. Let me tell you. Let me just say one other thing.
yeah.
So in 1977, John and Barbara Ehrenreich write a book called The Professional Managerial Class, an essay identifying this class because they found that all of the leftists in the post 68 period were all college educated, and the college educated professional managerial class was dominating leftist activism. And they said this is not how leftism evolved in America. It was like it came out of working class unrest, it came out of labor unrest. But after 68 and into the 70s, left liberal what people like to say spaces are completely dominated by this new class and its values. And
Hmm.
what they diagnosed in 77 is even more dire today. And they were like, how can we build a mass working class left if the leaders of the left are all PMC people rather than people drawn out of the labor leadership? And they diagnosed the problem in
We
77. So I feel like I'm just working on what Darren Reich's worked on. It's gotten a lot of hostility from certain classic Marxists. Of course, like PMC outlets didn't review the book, they didn't care. But there was a lot of grassroots, like people wrote me from all over the world saying, I can't talk about these issues, but I found your book. It made me feel so, it made me more clear about what's going on, from New Zealand to Canada to Poland. Like, people are understanding that these values exported from the United States are a form of new liberal hegemony and American imperialism too.
And also, let's walk over here, and I want to throw this up here real quick before we go through the piggy bank, because this is the piggy bank where the PMC hoard their virtues or their morals, because this also has to do with this again, like I know this milieu very well, this moral superiority where I want to throw up. But one of the things that I want to show here real quick, if the camera can go on the board, because while reading the book, I was also reminded of a film that I used to love, and the film is Idiocracy. I don't know if people here seen the film Idiocracy, and I thought like, oh, this is amazing. And when Trump got elected, there were think piece after think piece of like, oh, look, the Idiocracy is becoming real. We elected an idiot president. Here is actually an article from The Guardian. Idiocracy, a disturbingly prophetic look at the future of American stupidity. But what it really does, if you haven't seen the movie, there's a guy who is of sort of middle of the road intelligence, not the brightest bulb in the batch, and he gets frozen with this experiment, and he gets thawed out 500 years in the future, and everybody is really stupid. Now, why are they stupid in the movie? Because only stupid people procreate, and smart people think too long before they procreate. And it plays on that, the kind of notion and those kind of cliches that you write about, which is the consumption habits, the culture that people consume, is really that's the reason why everything is collapsing, right? The environment collapses, the culture collapses, because the guy watches a television show called Hit My Balls, or what's the name of that show? So here's the president with a machine gun. Everything is sponsored by Pepsi, and the film in that sense is very problematic, because similar what you talk about in the book, there's no real class analysis, there's no
No.
real analysis in the movie that actually capitalism is the reason why this world in the
Yep.
future is so messed up. I mean, a little bit, everything is sponsored
No,
by
no, you know what
Gatorade and
it's
stuff
a
like that, but yeah,
no, you know what
go ahead.
that film argues, like, it's consumerism that's the problem, not capitalism. Right? Like,
Yes,
we're just
consumer
consuming it, we're
choices,
just idiots.
yes,
We're just idiots because we're consuming so much.
good
But
point.
it's like, if you don't have, like, in many places in America, it's like cheaper to get a soda filled with corn
Absolutely.
syrup than it is to get clean water. So are you
That
going to blame that person for drinking a lot of soda? Or if their family can only afford like $10 of groceries and soda has, a lot of calories in it, then, they're getting calories from it. The other interesting thing about
individual
Idiocracy,
choices. Yep.
yeah, the other interesting thing about Idiocracy is that in the end, it fetishizes intelligence. And that's
Hmm.
very PMC, because that's a very professional managerial class value. Like, it, the professional managerial class think they're just smarter than everyone else. This is what happened in 2016 when Hillary Clinton ran against Donald Trump. They just thought, oh,
Hmm.
he's so stupid and she's so smart. She's like
Hmm.
the perfect professional. She's so qualified. But she totally was cut off from, the sense of public discontent with the way that America was going, the unfair bailout of the banks after 2008 that
Hmm.
allowed the banks to survive, but people lost their homes, lost everything. And people felt like things were very, very unfair in the way that the 2008 crisis was resolved. It was blamed on the Democrats. And yet, the Hillary Obama continuum was just very smug. Like, we're going to be okay. We just have the smartest people in the room taking care of things. And actually, that formula was rejected by a
Yeah.
slim majority of
And
people, but still a slim majority of Americans. And I'm always wondering, like, there are so many popular policies that could create popular support for the Democratic Liberal parties, you know, nationalizing healthcare, for instance. But they never
But
seem
that's
to emphasize that.
well,
They love not focusing on things like
well,
that.
yeah, and I have a quote from you from the book around that on the board right now is a quote here along those lines. PMC virtue hoarding is the insult added to injury when white collar managers, having downsized their blue collar workforce, then disparage them for their bad taste in literature, bad diets, unstable families, and deplorable child rearing habits. So this individual consumption, but you also mentioned intelligence, and of course, as we know, when they talk about intelligence, it's a specific type of intelligence
Yeah,
that is measured a specific way and
yeah,
rewarded a specific way.
yeah, exactly.
Vanderveer here in the local chat says it's not individual choice, it's sugar, and sugar is highly subsidized. Absolutely. So
Yeah.
on the one hand, that's pushed out, and then people are being sort of, uh, ridiculed that they can't really make good choices and
This
stuff
is
like that.
like some big agriculture, big food in America just drives me crazy. So it's not just sugar, it's high fructose corn syrup.
Hmm.
Farmers overproduce corn. They turn that, like half of Americans are made up of corn. Like half of me is probably corn by now. But corn is a big industrial crop and it feeds meat and and they turn it into high fructose corn syrup. And I feel like they just like pumping it from these industrial farms right into the American bloodstream. And then you have more and more like um, abstruse dieting forms when the whole ecology, if you want to think about like our world as an ecological system that's
Right.
connected to each other, the whole ecology is about like destroying people's bodies and then selling them drugs to get them get back okay again. And the really like a striking thing, if you think about the 18th and 19th, early 20th centuries, that the working class didn't have enough calories. They were literally fighting to get food and they were hungry. Like my parents, I'm just one generation from people who really knew hunger, right? Today there are people who are um, badly fed in America. There is hunger, there is food
Hmm.
insecurity, but there is a level of marketing and industrial food production that is just using the production processes of capitalism to exploit the people who have the least money. And so you have rich people who are thin and poor
Hmm.
people are fat. Like
That
in the
completely
night,
changed. Yeah, it's fascinating because that was
it's really
exactly the other way
fascinating.
around, right?
Yeah.
Yep.
If you think about like the 20th century, early 20th century game Monopoly, like that we all played in America, the robber baron is this like little fat guy, right? In his tuxedo and his hat, and he's like the figure of evil. Today, like, who's Mark Zuckerberg, Jeff Bezos, all these guys are like really worked out because they're all on keto diets and all this other stuff.
Yeah.
It's like they're not only uh, yeah, they've actually created this ecology that's killing poor
They
people through, yeah,
they lean in, Catherine, don't you know?
they do.
Leaning
They
in.
lean in.
The
They lean
grit, the
in.
grit is what pushes us forward. And Lily Lal says private cooks help. Yeah. I
Yeah,
mean, why do these
exactly.
poor people don't have a private cook? Obviously, they're not working
Exactly.
hard enough. And also,
Exactly.
I do want to remind
Exactly.
people that the book was sent to me by Western Verlag. Big thanks to Rüdiger, who sent it to me, and I immediately gave it to a friend and bought another copy.
Oh,
So book is out, the Tugendpächter from Western Verlag, and I read it in parallel just to make sure that the translation is correct, and it is correct. I checked the term meritocracy um, is correctly translated as Leistungsgesellschaft.
yeah,
In a
less
nutshell,
than
30 seconds, and we'll talk about Obama a little later, but I had to promise my wife that I'm not going to do Obama bashing the whole hour. Um, the weird thing with Obama is that I was a big Obama fan and I felt let down by him. And my wife one time said, like, you constantly bitch about Obama. Why don't you bitch about Trump? And I go, like, Trump, I know he's an idiot and an evil person,
Yeah.
but Obama, I just had a different conception. And maybe I was naive because Adolf Reed wrote about Obama's neoliberal tendencies a long time ago, and we'll talk a little bit about it later. But Obama is an interesting example where where meritocracy or the system really worked for him. And
Mm.
I mean, what
Mm.
do you think? Does he really believe that it will work for everybody, or
I
is
don't know. I don't know, but I think he's an opportunist and very, very savvy and smart. And he is now parlaying his former presidency into a giant fortune. Um, I, he and I are about the same age. He's a little bit older than I am. He read similar books and, did similar things. But I think that at some point you're so ideologically captured by the system when you keep being rewarded for being the smartest guy in the room. You
but
keep
it's
take getting
also
good.
that when something, I, I, I need to say, I don't want to get off a tangent, but I think this is an interesting point that you make in your book as well, because the PMC, they believe in these systems because oftentimes it worked for them. And
Yes, yes.
as much as I had differences with Arnold Schwarzenegger when he was governor, I have to appreciate Arnold when he talks about how he came to America and how he made it, because he goes out of his way to acknowledge other people. He says
Hmm.
he was a hard worker, but he always, in every interview, he talks about, okay, there were other people that helped me, and there
Hmm.
was a lot of luck involved. And I have the feeling in my sort of milieu, the PMC in my milieu, they never acknowledge that. It's all about
Mm,
just individual grit. These other factors do not matter. So when you're not successful, this is really only your fault.
yeah, yeah. And
Especially and this is in the German context. In America, it's a little different because I think people in America are a little bit more, or the people that I interact with are more acknowledging that the system is not that perfect. But in Germany, I think people are still quite delusional about that.
mm, I think that, there's a kind of belief in technocracy and making things more efficient by reforming the system, by adjusting the system, and people who believe in the meritocracy just think that we need to have inequality of opportunity, not a formal equality, but just like let everyone start at the same spot and then let them race. Well, working class people generally start with, it's like making everyone start at the same spot and race, and having some people have giant, weights attached to
Mhm.
them, and other people who have wings, and then saying, all right, but if you win the race, it's just because you're faster. I mean, you all started in the same place. Is that the notion that we want, is just to have a meritocratic society where everyone can get to the starting line, and then when the gun goes off, all those built-in systems of inequality just don't matter anymore.
Mhm.
And the PMC really believes in the meritocracy. That's why they really believe in education as a social elevator to bring, the smartest working class person up into the elites. And as someone who's worked in education my whole life, I have to tell you that that is so damaging. I have some students who, if they bought into this, then they would just feel themselves inferior to everyone who went to
Mhm.
Harvard, Yale, Dartmouth, Princeton, whatever, because they were
So
just
you teach at UC
smarter than
Irvine, which
them.
is a nice school, but people who are there, you're saying that they still feel like losers because they're not in Harvard.
Well, no, I don't even think that they feel like losers. Objectively speaking, I have students who are as smart as students I've seen anywhere in the world in the East Coast, but their parents are working class.
Hmm.
Their parents are not connected to any kind of cultural life, because I work in a film and media studies department. So they come out with they're brilliant, and they have none of the resources of someone whose parents like work in at the Washington Post, or whose father writes for the New Yorker, or whose mother is an investment banker. And I don't think they feel like losers. I think they know that the mountain they have to climb is just a lot higher than the mountain that these assholes have to climb. And this kind of inequality was something that America wanted to destroy because it was against feudalism and inherited privilege. And during from 1945 to 1972, in the industrialized world, there was a massive transfer of wealth from the top to the bottom through taxation, through progressive taxation, that was then not cash transferred to working class people, but part of building like the American highway system, the public university system, the infrastructure that creates a more equal environment for everyone. But inequality right now is just baked into our world. And I would say, I don't want to project into my students' lives, but I would say that the way that they cope is that the smartest student in my classes thinks of their horizon as more limited, whereas the asshole who graduates from wherever, Princeton, is just like, oh, I can be like king of the world, or I can be a CEO, and I'm gonna
I
go.
love that. Oh my
I'm gonna
God.
do that. I'm gonna do whatever. I can
So,
have it all. And my
okay,
students are like, I know I can't have it all.
I'm going
What
to
can I
play
do?
devil's advocate, and I have to say, Catherine, because you were saying earlier off the air that sometimes you don't know if I'm serious, and you're not the only person. I've been married to a wonderful woman who still doesn't know when I'm serious, and I apologize for that. But let me play. So I'm going to be tongue or devil's advocate is, I think, the term. So you just said like I can be a CEO now, and earlier we were talking about Hillary and stuff like that. Now, what's wrong, Catherine, with women finally getting their fair share? Are you possibly a class reductionist? This is a term I would like you to define because this is an educational program and we have people from all walks of life. And I don't know if people know even what that term means. But now you said basically, uh, a female CEO. Isn't that what we want, Catherine, in society? More female CEOs?
Well, this is what Adolf Reed and Walter Ben Michaels talk about, is that
Mhm.
the professional managerial classes wants proportional justice. So if we had 50% CEOs, but still the top 10, the 1%, and the top 1% of Americans owning 90% of American wealth, that's okay. As long as the top 1% is 50% women, 11% African American, 30% Latino because they're coming up in the world, and maybe like 4 to 6% Asian American. And as long as those numbers are proportional, then the grotesque economic inequality that we live with is okay. And
Mhm.
I disagree with that. And the other thing is, like, I feel like feminism has been completely captured, or popular culture feminism has been completely captured by the PMC. Now, let's look at Barbie, for example. Barbie was fun. Barbie's a fun film. Barbie supposedly feminist.
Mhm.
This is what feminism has come to.
Mhm.
My being able to go to the OBGYN. But when Barbie at the end of the film goes to the doctor, I'm like, does she have health insurance? Like, how did she just come out of Barbie world? Does she have
Yep.
Medicare?
Yep.
In California, if you're really poor, you can get Medi-Cal. Maybe she's on Medi-Cal. It's like, what about that level of feminism, where you want everyone to have equal, nationally paid for healthcare. So the other thing was, like, if you look at like what socialist feminism was, like through Rosa Luxemburg or Emma
Ooh, Rosa Luxemburg. I love her.
Goldman,
Mhm.
they wanted to liberate the working class so that working class women would have sovereignty and equality. And now you look at all of these feminist icons, and they're all PMC women.
And we have a Rosa Luxemburg slide here. Rosa Luxemburg, amazing person. I love her so much. And she was
Enthusiasm.
murdered in
Yes,
1919, let's not forget, by
by the
actually,
SPD.
exactly, by the Social Democrats, kind of in liaison with right-wing street thugs, where they thought, like, these right-wing street thugs are not great, but they're not as bad as the communists. So
As the
let's
communists,
hook up with them.
exactly.
So
Exactly.
uh, folks here, I see Monkey's putting all the awesome links in the local chat. So we put a lot of information out here, and this is fantastic. So read up on this stuff, and if you're just tuning in or if you're just showing up, today we're speaking with Catherine Liu, who wrote a book with the title "Virtue Hoarders: The Case Against the Professional Managerial Class," out from Minnesota University of Minnesota Press, and out in Germany, Die Tugendpächter, Westend Verlag. Absolutely fantastic book, 90 plus pages or 80 pages or so. And you can read this in an afternoon, and I think you will look at the world very differently. And before we go back to the office, finally, I do want to throw this out here because Shyla, who together with Monkey helps me prepare the program, we talked about Obama because you have Obama in the chapter with in a chapter called "The PMC Reads a Book."
Mhm.
And before I'm looking at the title, going like, "Oh my God, is Catherine now sort of chastising me because I'm a bookworm?" And sometimes I've been accused of being an elitist. But there are different ways to read books. There are different ways also to tout your book reading and to kind of, again, like you're writing about, it's like, wearing it on your sleeve. Look, I read, that kind of thing. Um, so anyways, we talked a little bit about Obama, and Shyla, who is from the Chicago area, told me about the Obama Presidential Center, which is celebrating
Mm, mhm.
somebody who rose in the meritocracy. Um,
Oh my God, look at that image.
and
Wow.
it is displacing people. There are many, many articles now where how it gentrifies basically overnight an entire neighborhood, displacing people, raising the prices here. It's built in a community park, used to provide shade on hot days, removes 326 trees, which remove 22 tons of carbon dioxide, etc.
Mm.
Um, Absolutely insane, and built to celebrate reading and all the good stuff. But does it have to be that way is the question. I mean, does it have to be such a church of of virtue hoarding
Okay,
in
wait. Can I just back up here one
yeah.
second? A presidential library does not celebrate reading. It's a
Oh.
monument to like the president's
But wait, but there are
achievements.
photos. This is from the Obama website. Here is a person reading to children. Catherine, you're
Yeah,
blowing
okay,
my
it's a
mind.
library. It's a library, and that's great. But and I am a total bookworm, and I'm not going to lie about that. And in fact, I'm going to confess that I hate, airport novels. Like I only read literature, which is like terrible elitist thing. But
Oh, they
I
had an
don't.
Arundhati Roy once at a Singapore bookshop, but now we're talking elitism. Go ahead, Catherine. I'm
Okay.
sorry to
Oh
interrupt.
wow. So yes, that's
It was
like
an
the perfect
outlier.
sort of utopic image of this library where an adult is reading to children, and children are partaking of this. But what I was going to say, what it's all about like sort of disciplining people to behave certain ways with
Hmm.
reverence
Hmm.
towards. In my book, I talk about Obama's love of To Kill a Mockingbird, and so it's about indoctrination of people to revere these like Cold War liberal cultural artifacts, which are all in the end like extremely anti-socialist, anti-communist, anti-class analysis. And in To Kill a Mockingbird, it's really an allegory about like the proper use of violence, and who and the proper use of violence. Then this is published in 1960, and it becomes like a big bestseller. It's about promoting this idea that Americans and the righteous American is the proper user of violence. And
Hmm.
in this small town in Alabama, I think, the working class white people are all racist and part of the Ku Klux Klan, and it's the lawyer father of Scout Finch, Atticus Finch,
We actually
who
have
is
here
the
an image
non-racist.
from the movie with Gregory Peck.
I
So
love
so
Gregory Peck, by the way. I
yeah.
just want to
Now
tell you
you're
all that.
trashing this wonderful movie, Catherine. I mean,
No,
or
the
the book
book,
rather. The
the
book,
book.
yes. Yeah. So the
No, there's
problem
some
with the
real
book is,
problems with the movie too, but I mean, Gregory
yeah.
Peck gives a great performance. I mean, just anyway. So then you just think like, oh, lawyers are really good, people, and they're not racist. Well, it just all the sociological analysis of the constitution of the Ku Klux Klan in the South had showed that there were wealthy people, members of respected society who
Mhm.
were the most racist, who put on the hoods and harassed and killed black people. But in the novel and the film, it's the working class person
Mhm.
who is the evil person, and the African American working class person is a kind of helpless, vulnerable subject that needs to be saved by the upstanding Atticus Finch. So
Well,
it's a great sort of allegory of the PMC's fantasies about what its role is in progress, in social progress.
yeah. All we need to have now is a black and an Asian Atticus Finch, and we're good to
Yeah,
go.
yeah, exactly. And a female Atticus Finch and everything else.
Yeah.
So here's the thing,
Leaning in.
guys.
Yeah.
Lawyers did not get us the weekend. Lawyers did not get you the 8-hour working day.
Uh-huh.
Lawyers did not get the Brits national health care. It was agitation from the working class that scared people into
Mhm.
making concessions, that scared the bosses into making concessions. It was not an upright lawyer going, oh my goodness, people are working 16-hour days. This is really bad. No, people were working 16-hour days and killing themselves. And the working class organized itself and rebelled, struck, were killed, and scared their bosses into making concessions. Now, is that enough for a revolution? Is that enough for overturning the capitalist mode of production? Um, it's a beginning, and the capitalists were smart. By the 20th century, they understood that they had to make concessions and that they had to be ever more ferocious about their control of the economy.
I'm just
There
gonna
was,
put
okay,
uh,
sorry.
no, no, no. I apologize for interrupting. I just want to put that in here before I forgot a little bit earlier. And this is very U.S. centric, of course, because you are a U.S. citizen and you're writing about the world that you know. But I also know that you travel and you have a new forward for the German situation. So you're also familiar with the German situation, which is fascinating. I'm kind of also kind of balancing these two different worlds, and it's fascinating. But in the U.S., what we talked about a little earlier, the I just want to briefly read this quote from the book about former presidential candidate Elizabeth Warren. Elizabeth Warren has proven herself more interested in her own professional ascendancy than in the political ideology and social values that she and Sanders are supposed to share. So you're talking about your conception of socialism and of equality and a world that we could create, and we're not, and the capitalist class being smart to give little concessions here and there, but also do the good old divide and conquer stuff. And it just occurred to me when I read this here. I remember, Catherine. I don't know if you remember, there was a when Bernie Sanders advocated for Medicare for all. There was a
Mhm.
talking point on commercial media, on corporate media, that was regurgitated over and over, where they said, "Yeah, yeah, that's a good idea, but 3 million of workers in the healthcare industry will become like unemployed." And
Insurance,
right?
insurance
Oh,
people.
sorry, insurance, right? And I was like, that's
Yeah,
absurd. And now, after reading this book, I completely understand, because I was like, 3 million, that's okay. Well, yeah, that's bad, but we'll find some other jobs. I mean, this is a much bigger project here that we're talking about. And they were so focused on these people, but these were well-to-do PMCs basically working in administrative
Yeah.
positions in the
Yeah.
insurance
Yeah. Yeah.
companies. And
Yep.
that was seen, and I felt like, how does this even work? How does this ridiculous talking point even resonate with people? But that's why it resonates, because everybody wants to be in that class if they're not, I
Well,
guess.
the thing is that the people in this class, they vote a lot more than the working class. Like
Mhm.
people in America who are at working class or poverty level, 65% of Americans don't have a higher education degree. They don't vote. They don't vote in the same numbers that PMC people vote. So, of course, the politicians are going to be concerned about their own constituencies and the big money that, big pharma and big insurance gives them as politicians because they're constantly having to run for re-election. But I guess I'm just like still, uh, it's not so surprising to me now, but it was like really painful in the 2020 election when Elizabeth Warren, who hadn't won a single primary, could have thrown her weight
Yeah, yeah.
with Sanders when Pete Buttigieg and Klobuchar threw their weight for Biden, and she didn't. And she
Yeah.
didn't. And a lot of it was having to do with, like, I think these apocryphal stories about Sanders' sexism. And so this is how a class that wants to preserve its privileges weaponizes identity to actually put down someone who actually could have promised like major economic reforms.
And it's
So
a perfect example, because to this day, when you bring this up, and I bring this up, you are being, you're these Bernie bros, the Bernie bro, and that really caught on to. It's fascinating. I don't want to get totally sidetracked and
yeah, yeah,
relitigating that,
yeah.
but I agree with
Still
you
hurts, still
100%.
hurts, still hurts, it
But
still
it's along the
hurts.
line what you're right about with this kind of, being sort of seen as a class reductionist. And you're right, something hilarious is you said, like, oh, you're a socialist. Why are you professionally dressed? Shouldn't you wear burlap sacks? And all this kind of ridiculous sort of a modern version of red baiting basically is also what you're right. Okay, but let's go back to work. Let's go back to the office now. This is
Okay.
an ambitious thing. Arieto Chiori, who is here on the left, she built this whole thing here. Amazing work. Now we got to go through this piggy bank. So follow me. We're going to go through the piggy bank into the office, because enough chit chat. We got to lean in. We got to go back to work. Oops. Oh my God, I can't go through it.
Oh wow.
Oh, here I am. Here I am. There's even
Okay.
more people here. Catherine, please take a seat. This
All
seat
right,
is
well,
for
let's see if I
you.
can do that. Let's see.
This is the test to become in the upper echelon of management,
A
and
second
everybody
life.
else. There you go. And we have a few seats, and if there's not enough, please.
I've like sunk
Yeah.
into this chair. I don't think I should be
No,
like
no, no.
this.
Yeah, we got you. Hold on. Here we go.
Okay.
I'm gonna fix this, and
You know what? I'm happy to take questions from the
there we
chat
go.
now. I feel like we've talked a lot. Um, should we do an open question where you moderate, Drax, or?
Yeah, yeah. People know, and people
Okay.
commented a lot here. No, no, no. You're fine. And if people have questions and comments, please put it in there, and please repeat it. People having a parallel discussion here as well, which is fascinating. And we prepared a lot of slides that I want to get to as well.
Okay,
I have
good.
a question about Occupy Wall Street, because my wife read the book before I did, and then she went to me and said, Occupy. She's making interesting points about Occupy Wall Street, and I go like, what does she say? I was like, "Ah." She said, well, I think she criticized Occupy Wall Street. I said, really? German sociologist Oliver Nachtwey, I'm a big fan of, actually thought it was a great example of sort of, a movement that got the ball rolling at least a little bit. I mean, it created the 99% slogan. But what is your beef with Occupy Wall Street? What's your critique? And if people don't recall what Occupy Wall Street is, maybe we should summarize it. 2011, uh, people congregated in a park in New York City on Wall Street and just camped out there.
Yep.
and had
Um,
slogans and
what
chants.
did they want? So this is one of the questions is there was an incredible groundswell of people who occupied public spaces across the country. It started in Zuccotti Park on Wall Street. It was sort of in the aftermath of the 2008 financial crisis. And I just want to ask everyone, like it was so dramatic. It went on for months. We thought there was going to be some great reform of the financial system, but can you think of one thing, one demand that they made when they
Mhm.
had the world's attention?
Mhm. Well, they were, I
What
mean,
was
they
that?
didn't like I mean, I know you're asking about a specific demand. Um, yeah, that's a good question. I don't know. I only know that they were pissed off at how the financial crisis
Right.
was happened, how the Obama administration did not really prosecute the people who drove the car into the ditch.
Okay, so were any of those people prosecuted? Did Goldman Sachs go down? Did Solomon Brothers go down? Did Wells Fargo go down? Did anyone make any specific demands that someone could respond to or reject or prosecute? No, because Occupy Wall Street was made up of mostly, and this is what, sociological studies have shown, of college educated people who are on their way down. And all of these people, many of whom I knew, I knew what they were reading. They were like very committed to a certain form of anarchism. And I remember talking to people who were in the California part of this, and they were like, "No, no, we don't want demands. If we made demands, then it would make the authorities feel like they had authority." I was like, "They have authority.
Hmm.
How are you going to?" And the other thing is like, how are you going to build a mass constituency? Because everyone is really, really mad about the financial system, right? And they just went more and more into their like, let's just like click and be like avant-garde or anarchistic in our meetings and have these meetings that go on and on and on. Well, can I just say one thing? Like, especially in New York, a lot of working class people, they couldn't go occupy Wall Street because they had to work jobs. And a lot of working class people, it's, all factual, they have children. I had a child
Hmm.
at 10 at the time. Could we go camp out? Could we go camp out for days on end, months on end? No. So there is all this anger. So how do you build that anger that isn't just a kind of anarchist expression of of a new subculture?
But how do you do that? Because I mean, movement building, and we mentioned Rosa Luxemburg earlier, and I'm reading a biography of hers. What is fascinating with Rosa Luxemburg, and I think you're aligned with that as well in your conclusion of your book, and what you talk about in the book is that you are proposing a type of socialism where that is not anarchy, where there are
Right.
trained people who are also training people to administer certain things. And Rosa Luxemburg was very similar, but she trusted, is my understanding from the biography, that she trusted working class people. She was didn't have that
Right.
kind of disdain of like, oh, we need to manage them because they're kind of stupid. Um, but
Well, in some ways, like the old communist socialist went on the provision that, like, the worker knows best. I don't know
Mhm.
best. A work process, someone who's in the work process knows best, and we need to empower, not just about, we need to make every worker feel less compliant with their bosses, right?
Mhm.
We need to call out the workers on Wall Street who are unhappy with working in the firm, right? But
So,
what I heard was that these bankers would walk by Zuccotti Park laughing at these people, go up to their offices and just look down on them and laugh at them.
mhm.
And you don't. So one of the things that gets me mad about Occupy Wall Street too is they have no idea, or they did not respect, like Marx did, the power of capital. So today, despite Occupy Wall Street and all the slogans, we have a private equity company called BlackRock and a subsidiary Blackstone that is worth $1 trillion. They control the fates of so many aspects of of people's lives, including housing. They're buying up all of this housing, re-renting it. They're one of the reasons why
but it,
there's unaffordable housing in America. No, let me finish.
Yeah, yeah.
Blackstone was sanctioned by the UN High Commission of Human Rights because they were just desperate, these UN socialist types who were trying to work in that organization, because Blackstone was also buying depressed social housing in Sweden, in Czechia. They do some cosmetic renovations and they rent it back to people for a lot more money. So the UN High Commission on Human Rights wanted to sanction Blackstone for creating the housing crisis. That was 2019. Then we went into lockdown. Everyone forgot about that. But it's like if Occupy Wall Street had any achievements about the question of capital, then they should be focused on not on preventing shit like this from happening. And it happened. And student
Yeah.
loan debt continued to balloon. Student loan debt now in America is over $1 trillion, too, right?
But
So
yeah, no, I mean, I
anyway,
agree with you, and that's the reality. That's the analysis. But and I, but how? I mean, this is the question is how. This reminds me. This discussion reminds me. We talked about this on another program with this group called Letzte Generation in Germany that I do support. They glue themselves on the street, and I had an interesting discussion with my son who's 20, and he says, you know what, they're impacting also like working class people who have to go to work. That is true. Um, but the reason why I think I mean, they're coming from the right place. They're doing something that comes out of a certain type of desperation. Um,
we need much more than that. We need much more than
oh,
just desperation
absolutely.
and
Absolutely.
performativity.
I'm not saying, and I'm not, you're absolutely correct. And there was a program here on a German left podcast where the guy from this last generation um, group was confronted by a little bit older Marxist who said, you know, you guys are not you're not changing anything. If you know, even if you succeed, and the German Chancellor says, okay, good, we're gonna not do this plant over here, this coal-fired power plant, and we're not going to um, we're stop building highways, and we're doing this and that. The mode of production is not changed. Yeah, but how do you do that? And we can't solve this here on this program. But I guess what I'm saying is I find it sometimes difficult to criticize these movements, it as frustrating as the lack of success it is, because I do want this whole system to be changed completely. But I
But
can't.
you have to start a step at a time and
But that's
do
what they
things
would
that
say.
can
That's
scale.
what they
No,
did.
no, 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 no,
No.
no, no, no. What they do is my next point would be you have to do things that you can scale up. And the
Hmm.
left has been so captured by countercultural stuff like the countercultural left as small is beautiful, that they love things that can't scale up. So,
Hmm.
or the PMC left anyway. So I don't, so one thing that one can do in Germany and the United States is stop fetishizing anti-nuclear. If you really want to have sustainable power, you need to look seriously at nuclear and just not be like, oh, it's horrible, it's war. It's not. There are studies that say that nuclear power is an extremely sustainable and safe form of power, and it would create a reindustrialization of these deindustrializing economies. The other thing you can do is be be skeptical about war and trade wars, and all forms of war that will, because if you really want to be green, you have to look at how the American military is the biggest polluter on the planet, right? And
Hmm.
so you can't just move like one coal-fired plant from one place to another. In Germany, coal was an important part of working class life. Coal built working class communities. It destroyed them as well. And you can't just say like, oh, we're all going to just use solar. Solar doesn't replace that kind of power generation. I think one thing that we can all focus on is scalable, cheap energy for people.
Hmm.
That's owned by the people, built by the people. We can look at bread and butter issues. really seriously, not gluing yourself to things or throwing stuff at paintings or fetishizing 16-year-old activists. That actually alienates working class people. Working class people still make up the largest populations of any country on the planet. So you have to think about like what can a left give them instead of taking away from them, because capitalism has taken everything away from them. So this is why I think the German Greens and American, environmentalists are all about like, oh, we need degrowth. Everyone has to stop making babies. Everyone has to stop consuming. Just wear old clothes. People can't even afford new clothes. Like there's that whole like old clothes thing. I just think like it's all like a rich person's environmentalism. So it drives me nuts. This kind of non-scalable fetishization of small gestures and performativity. And I think that part is definitely related to the fact that left liberal enclaves like the university just promote this kind of like hothouse, what I would say is pseudo politics. And then it makes the ground ripe for right wing populist reactions. And then you look at the media, for instance, and how there's media consolidation everywhere, totally dominated by the PMC. One simple thing that Bernie Sanders proposed that, is not on the table anymore, but is like not for profit grants for newspapers. If newspapers and media and television companies didn't have to chase money all the time to, report the stupidest things that they do for the richest people, which is what the New York Times does, then maybe like actual reporting could happen that mattered to everyday people. So I
Yeah,
do
yeah,
think
but
there's so
these.
much to be done. And you know what, Drax? What you're doing here is part of that, is public education. Discuss serious issues outside of the university. Discuss serious issues with people who are not part of academic prestige communities. Take all of that seriously. Like people at the university, like they say they want us to do that. They're like, "Oh yeah, Catherine, that's so great." But I was just went up for a promotion recently that I was turned down for because they were like, "Oh, it's too general audience what you're doing." And I'm just like, "Fuck you all. I'm going to keep doing what I'm doing. All of my research I can back up 100%, and I'm just going to make every effort to communicate what I know, what I've read, my ideas to the largest number of people possible, even though they're complex ideas. I don't ever want to look down on ordinary people who haven't been through like the bullshit graduate seminars you all have to go through now to get a degree. And then just be like, the puzzle of why we are all so compliant in a system that is not working for the great majority of people is a puzzle we all need to solve together. We all need to be able to act together, and we need to be able to have movements that scale up. One of the things I love about Lee Phillips's book about Walmart is he goes, when we socialize the economy, we'll already have logistics centers where we can have
Oh yeah,
distribution of
there.
goods because
I.
Walmart is there, Costco is there. Think
Mm.
about the scale and think about a company that owns has $1 trillion cash flow. That is fucking scary. And if you want to be a socialist, if you want to be a communist, like stop fetishizing 16-year-olds and think about how we can scale up our arguments,
Well,
appeal to the largest group of people.
thank you, Catherine, and I agree with 98% of what you said. You put it very well. I see myself as getting more radical by the hour, as all my friends in my age group actually go exactly the opposite direction, which is an interesting phenomenon. I'm sure you can kind of relate.
Yep.
Um,
Yep.
and yeah, we need to nationalize all this kind of stuff, absolutely. At the same time, I do have a lot of empathy for young people who are just in an existential crisis, and they're doing something, and that is important too at the same time. um we prepared this slide here. This is actually a painting by, let's see, who is this? By Henry Meyer, The Awakening from 1915, about the progressive era. Um, and
Oh, I
I
can't
find
I
this
can't
so.
see it. How can I move to see it?
You can hit the camera button. This
Okay,
is
okay, got it, got it.
the progressive era, maybe like in a minute or so, talk a little bit about because this is something that my German relatives
Oh yeah, I see it. Yeah.
really don't. I mean, this drives me crazy because there is so little knowledge of the radicalism that once
Yeah.
happened in America. And
Yeah.
you probably
Yeah.
have that same thing that the Germans, they love to portray America as bringing all the
Reactionary.
bad, yeah, exactly, but not
Yeah.
only reactionary, but also like, oh, they're forcing their terrible capitalism on us, and we had to kind of make the capitalism a little bit more smooth.
Right, right,
and
right,
and
right.
then you tell them, there was this progressive era, there were incredible movements, and
Yep. Yep.
also black communists in the South, and all this kind of stuff. But can you briefly say what the progressive era is for the uninitiated?
Well, so I'm going to go back before the Progressive Year and talk about the American People's Party, which was the last
Hmm.
um, third party that really challenged the Democratic Republican duopoly, and that arose out of the agrarian revolt of these overmortgaged. That was like an Occupy movement before Occupy, where all these farmers in the east, in the west, and the south were had to mortgage their farms because they were in debt. So they had a couple of crop failures. The railroad companies were charging a lot to move their goods. And there was very briefly at the end of the 19th century an interracial alliance too between Southern farmers, sharecroppers, and Western farmers and ranchers. And they called on the government. They met in the prairies. They called on the government to um, help support them against the railroad monopolies
Hmm.
and against bankers. And they were really radicalized by self education. They felt that the rural areas of America had been neglected by bankers, by industrialization. So they really wanted to have all of these farmers' education programs, and which were not just about farming, but about culture, about politics. And they were eventually destroyed and absorbed by the Democratic Party, but before this, they really represented this like quest to overturn the way that rampant capitalism was destroying the livelihoods of all of these rural people, and um, and out of this period of incredible unrest in the agrarian field, also industrial labor unrest like the Pullman strikes and the steel strikes, you had a group of American, elites, college educated people, but also, people who were from families that had money, like Jane Addams, but she wasn't admitted to university because she was a woman, creating new fields of social work, of social welfare reforms, people who were like John Dewey establishing against the, philanthropic billionaire donors at universities, this idea of tenure and academic freedom. Like a lot of the progressive era reforms had to do with this, uprising, this general sense of like major unrest and uprising within the United States. And so one of the theses of the book is that the PMC can go both ways. In its original form during the Progressive Era, it was on the side of the working class, and it
Mm.
was because there was so much labor unrest and unhappiness with robber baron capitalism that the PMC was like motivated to create itself as a counterbalance. But because of what happened through the complexification of finance capital, the prosecution of the world wars, and then the Cold War, the PMC is captured by the capitalists
Hmm.
and more alienated from the interests of the working class. And one of the amazing things about like the populist leaders and the populist movement and uprisings and the union leaders as well is that like from Eugene Debs to the populist leaders, these were workers who educated themselves and then who led worker unrest.
Mhm.
So you've got to look at like the radicalism of this period of American politics that creates social welfare. People say, "Oh yeah, Bismarck created social welfare." Really, the 20s and
Yes, Mark.
30 the New Deal came out of Social Security. It was pioneered by these technocrats of the progressive era, and actually the US imposed many of these progressive policies on Germany
Mhm.
and France because they wanted to prevent Nazism from happening. So a lot of progressive things that European social democracies have actually were put in place during the Marshall Plan when the US wanted to have a more equal world. When people did acknowledge, like mainstream intellectuals and foreign policy wonks, that massive inequality in Germany had made the ground ripe for the rise of National
Absolutely. And you know
Socialism.
what? And I always forget where I read this because I read that in they were talking about um, in Germany, we have this three-prong education system that is criticized a lot. I'm a big critic of it too. I think it's terrible. They're basically the kids are sorted after fourth grade into
Yeah.
three different
Yeah.
prongs. Of course, the
Yep.
proponents of that system say, you know what, it's totally, you can still go back to night school and then you can still go to university and stuff like that. In reality, again, you need enormous resources.
Yeah.
If you do that so-called zweiten Bildungsweg. Anyway, and
Yeah.
I read somewhere, and I need to retrieve this finally because in the discussions of the American of the Allies after World War II, there was some sort of analysis that also the three-prong education system, the division into sort of lower class, like
Right.
working people,
Right. Yeah.
manual labor, then sort of the
Yeah.
middle management, and then sort of the intellectual elites is
Mm-hmm.
also the ground for fascism because it's easier to manipulate uh,
Mm.
people on the lower ranks because of the way the curriculum is and the way it's hierarchical and so on and so forth.
Mm.
So they wanted to do away with it, but then somehow they didn't. But that was
Mm.
something that was apparently identified as a factor for why fascism was so easy to
Yep.
implement in Germany.
Oh, I can totally see that. And it's all about this compliance with order, like knowing your
Hmm.
place in society. And
Exactly.
knowing your place in society is going to make the working class really angry and susceptible to a demagogue who wants to smash everything.
Hmm.
And but it's also this like highly rationalized form of German meritocracy that just seems so
We have the
cruel.
best kind.
You have the best
Germany,
kind, I know.
we
I
have
sing
the
some
best
sad things.
kind of meritocracy.
Yeah,
Screw your
your
kind.
meritocracy is just more fair. It's just more meritorious. They tried to reform the French system as well because the French system also has a quasi feudal um um sorting mechanism where I think it's even worse because there are like four elite schools you go to if you want to go into government. And Macron, of course, went to one of those schools. Now, after the Gilets jaunes agitations, he said he was going to destroy the École Normale Supérieure and that École Normale ENA, all the feeder schools into the French government. I haven't followed up on what's happening with that, but he did acknowledge that it was creating
Mhm.
an incredibly unfair system. And one of the things that the U.S. did when they came into Europe after World War II was to push for university reforms.
Mhm.
So that it didn't happen completely. You're all stuck with this like highly stratified educational system. But then we have the rise of neoliberalism and the EU, and then Europe says, "Oh, why are our universities so bad? Why is it, why are they non-competitive?" They were like, "Oh, why are they not listed in the top universities in the world? It's so Anglo-American. Let's imitate the Americans
Mm.
and be competitive." So all
Yeah, yeah.
university funding went through the Bologna system. It was like excellence grants. Like you have to show how excellent you are. And one of the great things about the German system that the Bologna system tried to reform was that you don't have like the prestigious university versus the bad university. Universities were all pretty equal if you went to them. And then when the EU was established, you're like, oh yeah, let's give more money to the
Yep.
schools that are better, so they get even better. And then the shitty schools would just get really
And
bad,
at
and
the
then they can
same time, that
close.
was exactly, and it is so, and again, we're here in the weeds, but this is such a fascinating discussion because at the same time, the Germans criticize the Americans for, like, No Child Left Behind and that kind of stuff. And
Right.
all these methods, whatever you call them, they're essentially the same. And then here they're now embracing the same thing as like the ranking and all this kind of stuff.
Yes.
I want to briefly, before we have 12 minutes left or so. One of the important things, and we touched on it a little bit, is also you talk about, of course, how this affects children when PMC have children, and then how sort of they drill their children to be racehorses,
Mm.
and be successful, and all the kind of like stresses and anxiety that creates as well. And you mentioned a guy by the name of D.W. Winnicott, an English pediatrician, who had a different conception to this, excel, make the children excel, and also the pressure on mothers specifically to be the perfect mother. In German, we still have that term
Oh, you
Rabenmutter,
do. Oh, you
uh,
do.
which is a bad mother. But this guy Winnicott, this English pediatrician, he used the term. Where do I have it?
The good
The,
enough
the good
mother.
enough mother. That's it. The good enough mother. Uh,
Yeah.
which is wonderful, right? I mean, this is
Yeah. 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 And
it.
the good enough mother can allow the child to enter the world with confidence in play. And if you
Mhm.
feel, and there's a kind of perfectionism now in motherhood and in childhood
Yep.
because the PMC realizes that it has created a deeply unfair world. There is no working class. I mean, there's no middle class. The working class is being further left behind, and the PMC itself still has to like compete for fewer and fewer resources so that it can become a capitalist eventually. So you have this massive overinvestment in upper middle class childhood, even from from day one, from private schools to
Private
elite
preschools.
nursery schools, yeah,
Yeah.
elite nursery schools, and all of the professional managers class mothers, and this comes from the progressive era. They're reading a lot of advice and major research, and you have this idea that they're almost trying to optimize their child to
Mhm.
be a racehorse, as you say, because
That's what
there's
they
so much
do. It's all
anxiety
about
about.
that. We had my son. I'm sorry to interrupt it. Throw this in there real quick because my son plays violin, and he and
Mm,
the orchestra teacher came to me and said, "Oh, your son is so good. Can he come in and help out with the others?" And so I befriended this the guy who leads the orchestra, and he had enormous problems of recruiting kids to the orchestra. And this was very
mm,
interesting to me because the school provides free instrumental training and everything. It's a public gymnasium here in Munich. Um, and he said, "Well, we don't get enough people." And I said, "Well, why do you think that is?" And he said, "Well, the parents think it's a waste of time. They're playing around. The kid will never amount to becoming a famous musician, so might as
right.
well use those 2 hours that they have in the week to study math or something else."
Wait a
So
minute. This is in Germany?
yes, and this struck me as very odd because at a certain class level, actually learning an instrument is also part of the package, right? To be
Well, that was in
cultured.
the old bourgeoisie. This is the new
Exactly.
bourgeoisie.
So this is the new phenomenon is that is even, seen as a waste of time because those 2 hours where you play these little tunes, you have to study calculus or whatever else.
Oh, I've heard people say things like, "Oh, music, it's such good training for the brain so that your child can be better at math." I'm like, "What?"
That
Music
that
has its own logic. Art has its own complexity. How about aesthetic experience? See, this is what I think is happening with today's PMC. It's more competitive, more vicious, more virtue hoarding. It wants not only to hoard all of the resources, all of the money, all of its assets, but it also wants to hoard like all of the classical virtues about being a good person or being able to lead a good life.
That's
But
the
it
thing here,
is
what
at
Jerry
this,
says. Jerry says in the chat, music is worthwhile in and of itself, and that's exactly the problem, because then it's
yeah,
not in the package of being sort of this efficient racehorse. If
it's
it's
not
something,
monetizable. Right,
yeah,
right. No, it's
uh,
what we have is a Philistine PMC. Like it's just it only sees art education as optimizing the brain or things like that. And this is part of like this neoliberal dystopia that we're living in where everything is about competition and about monetization. And this class, it has accepted this as our fate, as their fate, and we have to reject that. And it's very, very hard to reject that without respecting the absolute power of capital to crush people and to crush the majority of people and their life worlds. So as you have these more and more rarefied forms of elite life, they're not. They might be like very expensive, but they're not good either.
mm,
We have like higher incidences of anxiety, of like teenage and childhood depression, and all sorts of things like this. Because what Winnicott was saying was that a child can have confidence in their environment if the mother is not driven, or the caretaker, to be perfect, if the mother is not driven to be perfect. And you can create this kind of trust in a world that the child then understands as first you withstand resilient enough for its own destructive instincts, and also dependable. And what we have with a lot of like liberal culture right now is we have a world that seems like it's about to fall apart because you'll be offended by someone's use of language, or the environment is going to be destroyed, so that children feel like intersubjective world is so fragile. Like if you say the wrong thing, or if you throw your fork in the wrong garbage can, everything's going to be a disaster. And this is what creates a lack of ability to experience play,
mhm,
pleasure, and aesthetics.
mm.
And this is coming from the liberal side of things. It's like I have all this anxiety about fucking recycling. And yet I tell myself all the time, my act of recycling, which I'm very, insane about, is not going to save the world. But it feels like the world is so fragile
That's right. If
that,
somebody actually, if one of the UCI professors maybe flies from Van Nuys with a private helicopter to you, that's outdoing all the recycling you could do in your lifetime, right?
well, yeah, I don't think UC professor are doing that. But yeah, but if a millionaire does that, yeah, sure. And then there's the other thing about just like being able to um, trust in your ecological environmental provision, that you'll be taken care of, that your caretaker will be taken care of. That creates a kind of confidence in people to be able to pursue, to use the world with pleasure. This is what Winnicott said: to play, to be creative. And this kind of perfectionism, this kind of anxious fragilization, this kind of lack of solidarity, this doesn't build strong bonds between
Mm.
people, or
I,
art, between people and art, between people and people. It's so
and,
destructive.
and that fragmentation that is inherent in our work life and capitalism is made even worse by that, as you're pointing out, the alienation and so on. We just have a few minutes left. I want if the camera can kind of go over the table here in front of us. The table, of course, has the book Virtue Hoarders and Tugend Pächter, but also you mentioned Barbara Ehrenreich, or the Ehrenreich, the couple. But this
The
book is
rise of the professional managerial class. It's online.
right,
It's part of it. It's online. It's open. Radical America was 1970s journal. It was first published
right.
there in 1977. You can download it. It's a fascinating magazine, and shows like how radical people on the left were in terms of thinking about labor and issues of class.
And this book that I
So
have here is actually Fear of Falling, the Inner Life of the Middle Class. That's one I
yes,
read that I find it very interesting. And
so
also in,
interesting.
in your book, you go into this hilarious that I heard about, but I didn't know what it was about. The transgressing the boundaries towards the transformative hermeneutics of quantum gravity. I mean, this whole affair is fascinating. It's in your book, and also you wrote a novel that is called Oriental Girls Desire Romance.
Yes.
It came out 1 year after David Foster Wallace's Infinite Jest, which I'm rereading right now. Coincidence? Probably. Has, sorry,
No,
apropos of
I
that.
felt well, I want I care a lot about writing, but because I'm the daughter of immigrants, I never felt like I could say, "Oh, I'm a writer." So I had to go get a degree so I could be a member of the PMC and not just
Hmm.
a member of the creative class. And it was part of my compromise formation that I managed. I tried to write creative nonfiction, creative fiction, and do my work in the university at the same time. All of that came to a crashing end when I had my son in 2000. But I also
But you had to
recently
optimize him, I'm sure.
I have to optimize him. No,
Otherwise, we had five
I was just trying to
novels.
stay alive. I was just trying to stay alive and like go to work and not be like covered with throw up in the mornings. And so when so more recently though, I wrote a memoir called Panda Gifts, and I'm releasing it on my Substack because I don't have
Awesome.
the energy to go through a literary agent or publisher right now. Maybe someday I will, but I want to just release it bit by bit, and it's about growing up as an immigrant child of two deeply disturbed people in the 70s in America. And and the other thing I'm working on is a book on trauma studies and a history of trauma culture. Let's just say that I want to think about trauma in a way that creates more solidarity rather than less. I want to think about traumatic experience and suffering in a way that creates more understanding of context rather than less. And so that's what rather than this focusing on individual recovery narrative, I want to write, something that demonstrates this attitude towards trauma that I'm actually writing about in the nonfiction book on trauma. But I'll tell you one thing, publishing in the United States has been completely captured by liberal PMC people. So if you know of anyone who wants to publish a book against that, let me know. But for now, I'm just, being like a one woman
I'm
publishing
gonna
house
make it
here.
happen, but I would also say, self-publishing, and we have here in the audience Jessica who does self-publishing, and there's a lot to it. I mean, I'm a fiercely independent, formerly, I worked on big corporate films, and I'm doing everything independently, and I'm not looking back. It's sometimes grueling and annoying to do marketing and do all this kind of stuff. But now that
Right?
you what you're doing on Substack with your memoir, I would totally then put it all together and release it. People will buy it. You do a little campaign,
I'm doing it little
you
by
will sell
little.
it.
I'm just doing it little by little. The other thing that I really like is just how you have a more immediate relationship with your like readers, your audience. You build your own
Oh
audience,
yeah,
and
yeah, yeah,
you know
totally. No, I
I
just
think
mean
that's what you guys
afterward.
like here. Yeah. Oh, sure, sure.
Yeah, no,
Yes.
because I'm a physical book
Yes.
guy. Like when you're saying this right
Me
now,
too. Me too. Me
I'm
too.
already
I
writing
am.
this down that once you have it done on Substack, I'm gonna buy a copy right away. I'm not against Substack or any type of other thing. I just mean like
I love a
and
book. I love a book.
exactly. Then you
I
have
love
it
a
like
book.
in one object.
I know, I know. Okay, if anyone wants to help me, just let me know because I've got a lot on my plate here.
Okay,
Um,
we need to we're gonna help you. We're gonna make this happen that this book comes out. Okay, we need to wrap it up. I just want to also say, Lily Lell is sitting in front of the TV. Please don't move. Don't move. But the TV is playing back in a loop a documentary called 16 in Webster Groves from 1966, and you can find it
mm,
on YouTube. And it's a fascinating. I think it's an hour, 20 minutes. It's a documentary about a little town in Missouri where the kids talk about their goals, which are all about having a house, living in the suburb, having a car. Nobody talks about civil rights. Nobody talks about revolution. Nothing. It was a huge movie when it came out because it was seen as shocking to see these sort of entitled kids being completely oblivious about the chaos that, or the strive for a better world that was happening around in the 60s civil rights
Mm.
era. And it's a fascinating film. And when I read your book, I remembered that I wrote a paper about this back in university when I studied sociology for 6 weeks until I quit.
Mm.
Um, so when you pick up Catherine's book, this is a fascinating complementary movie of one aspect. I just wanted to say that. Catherine,
Um,
this is, yes, go ahead.
can I tell? Do I have time to tell a story that
Yeah.
kind of accompanies that? So there was a Portuguese publisher, wealthy guy named Martim Avilés, who I really loved. He published a little theory book and journal in New York called Lusitania, and I was one of the guest editors of it. And he was very ill. At the end of his life, he went back to Portugal because they had like better health care. And I remember meeting him, and he's still like the 68 firebrand, he's a boomer guy.
Hmm.
And he's in a wheelchair, and we're sitting outside. He's passed away, and I'm RIP Martin. But we were sitting in a restaurant, and he was saying things like, these kids these days, they're so passive. They're so this was like 2007, right before the crash. He goes, they just they don't know what they want. They're so depoliticized. They just want the house and the car and the good life in the suburbs. They should want more. And I'm like, Martine, have you looked around? Kids can't get that anymore. Young
Hmm.
people, they can't get the house. They can't get the wife. They can't get the car. They can't they don't even have the material wherewithal to get what youth are disparaging as normal things. And I think
Hmm.
there's such a break between this kind of like aristocratic left that believed
Yeah.
like normal people were just idiots for wanting normal
Yep.
things, and the take and capitalism stripping ordinary people from all the ordinary things that were once like made up a dignified working class life. So that's what I wanted. I love that you keep
Yep.
coming back to this documentary, Drax. It really made me think about that conversation that I had with him. And he just looked at me like I was crazy, like I was coming from Mars, or I was a kind of conservative reactionary. And I realized like we can't entrust the future of the world to an aristocratic left.
No, and now I could go on with how I always describe Santa Cruz. We lived in the Monterey Bay area, and what I found so interesting about Santa Cruz was, in the Santa Cruz boardwalk, you saw um, both worlds. You saw two former hippie allies, right? And then 40 years later, one is homeless and begging for money
Oh, yeah.
on the boardwalk, and the guy who was his former buddy is now selling beads, uh, artisan beads in the store, and is calling the cops on his own buddy to remove him
Oh,
from the
wow.
boardwalk because he's bad for business. Anyway,
Yeah.
this is slightly besides the point, but it also shows the and that person who owns that store would probably say, I'm a lefty all the way. Which, by the way, oh, I have to say this. This is the last thing I'm gonna say, because you were on David Feldman, the great David Feldman, great comedian and also podcaster now. You were on his show, and Shyla, in our team, what we do is I read the book, and I don't read any past interviews of guests, but Shyla looks at these interviews and then pulls a bunch of quotes out, which are great. And you have a quote here that this is from the David Feldman show. You said, everything in California is designed to make upper middle class people feel good, like their trash don't stink. Your carbon footprint is much bigger than the carbon footprint of the working class person in India or China. So that's obviously spot on. But here, and this is maybe you can say a few words for your upcoming book about trauma, because this is a quote here from you. And you're talking about they've been really good at laundering their reputations through nonprofits, through philanthropy, but I would also like to say through iconic figures like billionaire Oprah Winfrey, who has a monopoly on popular culture and on the language of mental illness, mental health, and trauma right now. So briefly, in outlook of your book on trauma, what do you mean by that? I mean, here you're talking about major media figures.
Oh, this
Yeah,
is very,
setting the
very
tone.
complicated, but
Okay,
I think that
let's
it
do it for
also in
next
the
time.
also in the post 68 era, we reconfigured what we thought an individual was, and then made it more open to mental illness. But Oprah Winfrey really distinguished herself from other daytime talk show hosts when she went on television in front of millions of people and talked about how she had been abused, sexually abused by a cousin as a child.
Mhm.
And this was supposed to be a moment of progress for people, especially women. And this was a notion of like, we'll all be more empowered to talk about our suffering. But actually, what was happening in 1984 was Ronald Reagan was deinstitutionalizing the mentally ill. Ronald
Mhm.
Reagan was cutting social services, cutting welfare, cutting public support for working class people. And you have at the same time the escalation of trauma discourse for very wealthy celebrities. And I'm looking at how this period of time mapped onto the rise of neoliberalism, the fall of the Berlin Wall, and how trauma culture and trauma discourse didn't provide better care for Americans, but did enrich and empower the few, thought leaders like Oprah Winfrey, and also trauma studies people in literature and certain
Right.
segments of the culture industry. So I'll just leave it at
Fascinating.
that. And
Yep.
I'm working hard. I took a break from writing the book to be here with you guys, but it was really a
Oh, now
pleasure.
yeah, that's a PMC move right there, making us feel guilty. Oh my God. Well then, sorry,
No, I'm
Catherine.
saying
You
it
know
was a
what?
really good break.
You
Oh
gotta
my
lean
God,
in
Dex, you were
harder.
hilarious. You got
You
yeah, guys. I need to lean in harder. So I need to go back and work. No, I loved having this conversation and being part of this Second Life environment,
yeah.
which I was very nervous about because I thought I was gonna screw up.
No, 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 no. You will get you get a certificate in the mail that you can put on your wall. You can frame it. The frame is an additional cost,
I
$5.
really like diploma, so like
Absolutely.
please send me my certification.
Well, let me
Okay.
say big thank you, Catherine, and big thank you, audience. We had a huge turnout today. I'm always a little nervous if we get a turnout, but we got a really great turnout today. Thank you, everybody, for coming.
Thanks,
Lots of new
everyone.
faces. Uh, I'm going to run through the credits here real quick. The show is produced by yours truly, Isabel Sharon, Chala Supergecko, and Monkey. We've been around since April 8th, 2020. Unbelievable. Um, the research is by Shyla and Monkey. The location is always second.live/book club. If you go to that URL, you'll be teleported here. The avatars are made by Bespoke Caravan, and Bespoke is sponsoring this program. They throw us a bunch of Linden dollars. Bespoke is making fantastical avatars. They're not furries. They make furries too, but I'm told to say that they make fantastical avatars. So you look at this ad and you see what I mean. It's unbelievable. Also sponsorship from Arden Schwartzman and the Black Forest. He makes board games. He makes all sorts of things, but his board games are awesome. They're low impact, high detail board games. The avatar today, uh, Catherine's avatar was made by Isabel Sharon, and the world was made by Arieto Kiori. Absolutely fantastic job, both of you. Thank you very much. What else? Oh yeah, okay. And lastly, we have, if you want to support this show, by the way, you can put Linden dollars in the tip jar. There's the tip jar over there, the statue. Shiloh will tell you what the tip jar is. Or you can become a member of the YouTube channel. Now, the next show is not, we do monthly shows. Monthly plus is the system now, I call it. But the next show is not on the first Wednesday of October because we had a scheduling conflict with Sarah Dara Littman. Sarah Littman, as you know, is one of my favorite YA authors. She writes books about young people and technology. She had an amazing book about deepfakes. It was called Deepfake. And her new book is about radicalizing people online and funnel them into the extreme right wing incel um, sphere. And she tackles these issues with a compelling narrative with amazing characters. So these are novels with a very, very real, very topical background. And Sarah Lippman is back October 25th, and it's all in the calendar. And that's it. And I say goodbye and have a fabulous rest of the week.
All
Goodbye.
right. Thank